Kia ora and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with New Zealand artists. I'm your host, Mandy Yarkich. These conversations are intimate, uplifting and insightful. The guests on the show have absolutely enriched my life, and I'm sure their stories will have the same effect on you. Thank you so much for joining me to listen to these amazing people speak about what drives them, the way they work, and their personal takes on life. Toby Raine is a contemporary artist living in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland. He has a distinctive approach to his work, moving large quantities of oil paint across the surface of a canvas with confident strokes, creating expressive, emotive, gestural paintings. Toby spent 11 years studying at Elam School of Fine Art in Auckland, beginning in 2006 when he was 23 years old. Over the next decade, he would go on to complete a degree, then a master's, then a doctorate in fine arts. In this episode, Toby talks about how he chooses his subjects, how he achieves the delicate balance between representation and abstraction, and how his paintings reflect his personality. We discuss his journey to being represented by dealer galleries in Australia as well as in New Zealand, why he doesn't like his paintings to be described as portraits, and how he communicates with the viewer through his titles. We have a wonderful chat. Unfortunately, a few minutes into this episode, the interface microphone connection was lost, so we ended up recording most of this episode on the computer microphone. So the sound isn't as good as usual, but the content is better than ever. Morena, Toby.
Good morning, Mandy.
How are you?
Very well, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for coming out to Muriwai, and welcome to the Creative Matters podcast. I am very excited to hear your story for a number of reasons. Your paintings, I think, are incredible.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm also really interested to hear all about your very long extended stay at Elam School of Fine Art.
Yeah, that'll be a story.
Yeah, and how that influenced your practice. So, excuse me, I am full of cold once again, so a little bit croaky.
No problem at all.
And let's get into it. So you have just come back from the south of France, which sounds amazing.
It was amazing.
You had some beautiful weather, which I'm very jealous of.
Yeah, it was. I wish I was still there. The weather was amazing, and just the countryside and the history there is very inspiring. There's really nothing like it here. So
yeah, we don't really have the history in the same way.
No.
Yeah, it is really bad coming back to New Zealand, I find.
It is.
It seems to be worse than going the other way.
Yeah, I found that both times I did all the way to Europe, and barely noticed it going over, but on the way back I just sort of just feel like death for a decent week or more.
Yeah, and it doesn't help when the weather in Auckland is very dismal, as it has been for the last 6 months.
It's very dismal this morning, last couple of days, yeah.
Yeah. You were born in England. Were you the kind of child who was always creating at that point?
Yes. I always drew pictures, and a lot of them at school and at home. That was one thing that made sense, I suppose. Whereas, like, for example, I wasn't a sportsman. I wasn't very good at sports, but very comfortable drawing pictures. And the funny thing about that is there's not an obvious reason as to why you do that. But so I guess you have that creative streak wherever that comes from.
Yeah, it's just there. And did you have a family who were encouraging you creatively?
They always encouraged me to follow that, which I'm grateful for. My mum was an English teacher, so she had a strong sort of creative streak in terms of writing and so forth. So there was some sort of encouragement or influence there, I suppose.
And were you interested in painting as a child? Did that sort of come early, or did you discover it at high school?
It was mostly drawing until I went to art school. It wasn't that I wasn't interested in painting. You're always fascinated when you see a marvelous painting. But I don't think I did some painting in high school, but it wasn't until I went to art school that the painting really began.
And was high school art for you a place that you felt sort of safe and happy, and you were sort of starting to discover, what you could actually do with the visual arts, or did that come a bit later?
I was quite distracted at high school. So it was probably a wild couple of years for me. And so while I did complete high school, I don't think there was a huge focus there. I worked some dreadful jobs in factories in Christchurch where I grew up, and then sort of just fill in work, and I definitely learned I didn't want to do that sort of stuff that I was doing. Then I went to Australia for a couple of years, worked at my friend's restaurant, and just lived there as a really young guy. And then I sort of suddenly got ambitious in my early 20s and decided to return to New Zealand. I came to Auckland because my parents had moved here, and that was within half a year I'd been accepted into Elam, and that's where the journey began once I started there, I suppose.
And what made you decide to apply to go?
Okay, well, when I moved to Auckland from Australia, I do a lot of fitness. I work out a lot, so I had this idea that maybe I could, get into training or fitness training, which is contradicts the fact that I was never good at sport. But it was just in terms of sort of running and doing weights and Pilates and stuff like that. So I did a 6-month course at AUT, a health and fitness one, and it was fine, but I really was not inspired. I remember thinking, when I was going in to do and I did well at it, but I sort of had a light bulb moment there. It's like, well, if it's not this, surely it's the art thing that you've always just done naturally. And so then I put together the portfolio and submitted that, and they said, you're in.
And that was the beginning of a whole new life.
Yeah, and that was 2005. I started there in 2006 at art school.
And you were 23.
Yeah.
So you were like a mature student.
Well, yeah, by that standard, because most of them are straight out of high school.
Yeah.
But I'm grateful for that, because from what I alluded to before, I wasn't very focused at high school. If I had gone to Elam or some other decent art school at age 18, it would have been a waste of my time, and I would have messed it up, or I would have wished I'd gone later. So for me, that sort of 4 or so years gap was ideal.
Yeah, and it feels like artists do need that to kind of get a bit of a taste of the world and of themselves as an adult before they can start responding artistically.
Yeah, well, I certainly did. Like I say, I've always had some sort of ambition, but I had no idea what to do with it until I was at that point where I was about 22, tried one thing, and then I had that, you should be going to art school moment.
Which is so good.
Yeah.
So you did spend a long time at Elam School of Fine Art. Was it 11 years in total?
11 years.
Yeah, which is amazing. I have never spoken to someone who spent so long at the school.
I don't know, given the age I was when I finished it, it was probably too long, within that period. But I have a lot of fond memories, and it was like a second home.
Yeah,
by the time I left, because I was there all the time as well. When I started at Elam till when I finished, I would be there all day, every day. Whereas there are some students you barely ever see them. To me, it was very much because I knew early on that it was what I wanted to do, as in be an artist, not just be involved in art, but be an artist, that it was what I was. So therefore I was like, well, right, you're here all the time now.
Yeah, brilliant.
This is your studio, this is your place of work. So.
You became part of the furniture. So when you started, did you think, okay, I'll do a Bachelor of Fine Art and, do the 3-year course, or maybe possibly into a Master's? Did you ever have any idea that you would be there for so long?
No. At that point, all I think I had was the realization I wanted to be there, and the enthusiasm and work ethic. And, at that point, 4 years for the undergrad degree seems a long time. And it was a journey, very fond memories. But I think it was only around the time, first you finish third year and they sort of start talking to you about whether you want to do honours or just the standard fourth year, and I did do honours. And then I think at some point during that fourth year they start talking to you about whether you would like to do Masters, and so that I just decided then to do it. And I did it immediately, which, arguably you should or shouldn't do. But I went straight on, and I'm happy with that decision.
And then you did a PhD.
Yeah.
And you're now a doctor.
Yes. Well, technically it's a DocFA, a doctorate of fine arts, as opposed to the doctorate of philosophy. But yes, I did earn that title.
And that's another 6 years, is it? 5 years?
Yeah, it depends from person to person. I sort of, took a little break before I started it and got it done, and I think it was 4 with a gap or 2 here and there. But,
that's amazing. Wow, Dr. Toby.
Yeah.
So can you talk us through, or walk us through, that very extended period through your 20s into your 30s, and tell us about that journey and what your work was like and how it developed over that time?
I think very early on, I've always said, I think it was in the first 2 weeks at art school that I knew I wanted to be a painter. I remember we'd been given some assignment, and it was like a brief, with the requirements and the outcome and all that. And then there was this, which they always did, this list of suggested artists. And I went to the library and I got some books on a few, and one of them was Francis Bacon. And as soon as I saw the images, I remembered I recognised it, not in a very hugely familiar way, but it was just, I think I'd seen an image of one in that Tim Burton Batman film, funnily enough, the scene where they destroy the museum with all the art and the Joker stops them from destroying the Francis Bacon painting, this very gruesome looking one. So I remembered the painting. I said, oh, this is that artist. And I remember looking at the reproductions and already getting a feel for this bizarre way that he made work, which was all about the paint itself. And I became really enthralled by that idea. And I very quickly decided I'd like to be involved in that conversation. I think that's what I would like to do as an artist. Be a painter, and for that to be one of those painters where the painting is about the stuff itself, and a sort of an awareness of how you're using it.
So do you think that the paintings that you were making at the beginning of your study period, do you think they feel like the works that you're making now?
Oh no, obviously it changed a lot, but I did. At first it's quite hard to detach from that wanting to paint very illustratively thing, but I did try, and I remember Peter Robinson was one of my supervisors, and he's a good guy, and I always respected him. I actually knew him from high school when he taught at my high school, funnily enough. Anyway, he kind of encouraged that painting being about the paint thing, and he sort of encouraged what was going well with me. So I remember by the end of that year I stopped using acrylic and I bought some oil paint, and that was amazing, suddenly using oil paint in terms of what I'm talking about, just the way the paint is, the physicality of it. And so I was sort of, I guess, on my way there in a limited way by the end of that first year, just taking leaps and strides, shall we say.
And was your work portraiture based?
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought of them. Everyone calls them portraits, so I've given up arguing, but I've always sort of thought more, I work with a figure, I work from images, because I guess to me, people are the most interesting subject matter. And I find I quite like working with iconic sort of images. They're often sort of rock star images or images from films, and I find the iconicity of these people when I find a photograph that I want to use, and there's something in that motivates me.
And we'll talk a little bit later about your process.
Mm-hmm.
So how did your work develop through that time, and what did you actually do for your doctorate or for your thesis?
Well, my work developed basically by me just being in the studio all the time, getting used to spending a lot of money on materials very early on, and treating that space at Elam, which you had, which was, you were paying fees for, so it was there for you to use, just you treating it like your workspace, and really just experimenting a lot, like with big brushes or different instruments, and really sort of adding mediums to the oil paint and seeing how it changed the paint, or layering things up, or what happened if you started with acrylic and then put oil on top, and things like that. My doctorate, the thesis ended up being called The Life and Opinions of Baron Yeti. So that evolved. It's never, in the end, it's not what you thought about in the beginning. I'd probably cringe if I read my initial statement, or what do you call it, for wanting to do the doctorate. The Life and Opinions of Baron Yeti, I think, ultimately it was a response to going to a very contemporary art school, which Elam is, where painting wasn't exactly encouraged, and there wasn't an emphasis on teaching how to paint, and there were certain people who would obviously say painting's a bit dead, isn't it, be it students or otherwise, and it wasn't easy being a painter there. It wasn't easy learning how to paint, and there was a lot of this why paint at all going on in your head. It could be quite problematic. So I guess my thesis was a response to that, like a kind of a stubborn thing. Like, so how do you be this hopelessly romantic painter doing this superfluous thing, which they said was going to stop when photography began or whatever? How do you make sense of this nonsensical thing? How do you find a way to doing that? It was kind of about the thesis based around finding a logic to an illogical thing, embracing the hopelessly romantic nature of it. I don't know if that probably sounds pointless in itself, but that did end up being the point of the thesis, and how I explored that during those 4 or so years.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess there was a lot of research and that kind of thing within that.
Yeah.
How did that look?
The thing with the Doc FA was it's studio based, and you can do a PhD at Elam, and it's similar, except that that's more about the writing, less about the final body of work. And so I had to submit some writing at the end, which was 40,000 or so words. I think I probably wrote 80,000 and got rid of half of them, but and then the rest was sort of this exploration in my studio, and I had to document that as part of the written final thing.
And then did you have a show at the end?
I did. It was very much a breakthrough show for me. It was at Gus Fisher Gallery, and what did we call it? It was called Man Crush. It ended up being these sort of mostly rock stars or famous artists, and they all had beards, and they were mostly people I looked up to, which is what the Man Crush idea is about, and there was a sort of a kind of a corny embrace of the manliness thing with the beard and everything, and they ended up being, it was almost presented like a church hallway with these, they were on microphone stands, my paintings. So it was in itself, it was a very kind of conceptual show, because it was this summing up this body of work, and you could see the fronts and the backs of them. I still write on the backs of my canvas, so there was a lot of writing on the backs of these. So it was an interesting result. So it was a good show.
Yeah.
You have shows you're not so proud of. I think this one was pretty up there.
I'd love to see photos of the artworks.
I'm sure I can find it.
Yeah, flick me one and we can put it on your blog post.
I shall, yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And do you think it is similar, those works were similar to what you're working on now?
Yes. It was a strong body of work, I think, and that's not me being arrogant, it's me being so displeased with a lot of what I do. And I remember that was very focused, and it was the outcome of many years of very determined, very focused sort of working in the studio. So it was a real strong body of work, and that it certainly is reflective of the way I'm making work now. The work's obviously changed in 6+ years, but often I'll look back at them and think, I got to start remembering some of those things, because you often look back and think there were things you were doing then that were a bit stronger, things that were maybe not so strong.
Yeah, studying for that long and working on your full-time art practice must have been really challenging, and must have had its moments.
Certainly was. So yeah, I started that in 2013, I guess the main challenge for me was I went through a big breakup. So the person I was engaged to, we broke up at the end of that first year, and that was horrible, as it is for anyone. And so then I'm quite stubborn, determined sort of character. So I remember part of me was thinking, you didn't feel like doing anything, but the other part of me was, no, you're going to finish this. So I did 3/4, the 3/4 of the remainder of that, in the shadow of that breakup, and it was, some of it was quite grueling, because I wasn't feeling pleasant about all of that, to say the least. I remember when I mentioned it to a supervisor, they said, that they should have actually included the breakup thing in the handbook for doctorate. So I guess it...
That's part of it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, it probably did inspire your work in some way, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think things like that undoubtedly add a richness sometimes.
Yeah, can be good fodder, even though it's
painful,
not pleasant to go through.
And there were other moments, there were times when I was exhausted, and it feels like a marathon. You can't see the end, and there's not enough money. I didn't have a scholarship, so I was working at a big art supply store in the back of the warehouse there, stretching canvases for Gordon Harris, the art supply store, for several years, just to help. And I was teaching at Elam while I was doing it pretty much the whole time, which was great. I loved that, but there wasn't always enough work, and I was busy. There was a lot going on.
Yeah, that's huge. And why did you actually decide to continue studying and do your PhD?
I think at the time I'd had this idea that I'd like to be a university lecturer as a way, or lecture, whatever, be involved as a way of supporting my practice. Well, I'm not close to that idea now. I'm not so sure about it, and neither am I sure it's a great idea to do a doctorate, because it isn't. But I think I remember thinking, you probably do better if you've done the doctorate, and it just seemed like, it seemed an attractive idea to me to do this thing.
Did you feel like you weren't finished with what you were exploring?
That was also it. The 5 years of undergrad and masters came and went, and I missed the studios and I missed the environment, and I thought I took a wee break after that, but I quickly started writing an idea for going back as soon as possible, because I did think I'm not done there yet.
Yeah. And was it because you felt like you needed more time to experiment and develop?
Yeah, it was. And I guess I felt I was onto something with my work. The feedback had been good. I was definitely, I think, a fairly model sort of student, and prolific in the way I made, always there. But then I was out, and I guess I felt like I could accomplish or contribute something, which is what you're meant to do with a doctorate, by going back and spending a long period of time. And I thought it seemed dreamy at the time that I'll be able to teach at Elam while I do it, which was nice. But then, as we've discussed, there's other challenges. But I think I did want to contribute, keep learning, and kind of make a breakthrough in the way I made work. And I think I did do that.
Which is great.
Challenging as it was.
Yeah, but it paid off in the end.
It did.
Then after all these years at Elam, what happened next?
Well, fortunately, I made a splash in that last year with the doctorate. Like I said, it was a really good show, but by then I'd already hooked up with James Blackie, who was my first art dealer. I'd bumped into him at an art fair, I think that year, 2016, as I was wrapping up, and I was surprised because he was a guy I knew from high school, but I'd never, because he was with Page Blackie Gallery. That was before it just became Page Gallery when he left, and when I saw him at the art fair, I thought, hey, that's James Blackie, and so he's the Blackie in that gallery. So I went up and we had a nice chat, and I said, I'm doing my doctorate at Elam. Should I flick you some images? And he said, yeah, and I thought nothing of it, and so I did flick him images, and he said, we think these are great, please send us some immediately. And so, well, honestly, by the time that doctorate show came around, I'd sold a bunch of the work in it, which was at odds a bit with, I guess, the fact that it was a doctorate, but in the end I don't think it matters so much. But so they had to send some of it back for that last show, and so I'd established that, I'd hooked that up, that had happened, and so the very next year I had a big solo show at Page Blackie in Wellington, and that went very well. Everything sold, and I think I went to the Sydney Art Fair that same year. I'm pretty sure it was that same year. So it was a very busy time. So I hit the ground running after that doctorate. On the one hand, it was brilliant. I was very grateful. I felt very fortunate, but I was also incredibly burned out. So it was difficult, a conundrum. Feeling fortunate and excited, but I was tired.
I bet.
And it was like, right, Toby, so we need you to make all this work, and it's going to be great. And I'll be like, wonderful. And part of me meant it, but part of me was like, oh God, I'm so burned out.
Yeah.
But I kept going, and I made the work, and there was a couple of really great years there, very busy years.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How good that you went so well.
It was a nice payoff, I thought, because like I say, you got 11 years, and there's the occasional student who gets picked up by some great gallery straight out of the end of their undergrad or whatever, but that's like 1 in 1,000, and it'll happen to one student in your year, or one or two. or someone will get picked up by some gallery and then you'll find out they've stopped making. But for me, you get to this point where I think I'd actually resign myself to the fact this just may never happen. That thing where you get noticed and someone takes you on, and then it kind of happened by serendipity in the end, I guess, with this guy, because I didn't know James Blackie really personally. It was just we went to this kind of tight-knit school, so I knew him kind of by face and name. So it was just like, yes, I remember you, and then, as I say, by the end of that year, and I'd have probably been very worried about what happened after the doctorate, because it's like, it'll be like, well, now what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Having done this for so long. But I did have that, those goals there, or tasks, or things coming out.
And you were making connections, obviously.
Yeah,
positive connections, and people were responding to your work.
They did. Yeah. It was overwhelming, a bit humbling, because you're not sure how to deal with the success, I guess. Well, the work was really selling well, and people were not just that, people were very enthusiastic about it. I'd get wonderful feedback, and from James, mostly James Blackie at that time, and it was sort of, it would be surprising that you'd finally made that breakthrough.
Yeah. And your work is so unique. I mean, it just feels like there's nobody else in the world making work.
Oh, thank you.
Like that.
I think the aim is hopefully to do that. You just want to be able to contribute. Like I said, I decided early on the painting conversation was something I wanted to be professionally a part of, and the aim for me, basically for the rest of my study, was get to a point where you're doing what you do damn well, and in a way that hopefully is unique, however small, and however small a way it's unique to anything else.
And it definitely is, and I guess that's a big part of why people responded as they did, because it was something new and fresh.
Well, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. So for somebody who's never seen your work before, can you describe what your paintings are like?
I guess the first thing to mention would be that I tend to use a lot of paint. That didn't really happen on purpose. It was just through experimentation where the amount I used became more and more, so I tended to sort of be slathering it on. So that the main point of the using a lot is that the work is very physical. There's a lot of, I guess it is quite expressive. I shunned away from that word at art school because they told me, expressionism is very out of fashion. But never mind that, it is expressive, I think. And it's very gestural, the work. And like I say, I tend to use a lot of paint, even if there's not a lot on the canvas in the end. A lot is used. It'd be in a bucket somewhere, but if not on the canvas. I work from images. They tend to be recognisable people I'm interested in, musicians. Often it'll be a musician who I'm listening to at the time. It's sort of a way of keeping the motivation or the interest going. But I like to think of them as abstractions of figures, so I don't really think of these as figurative work as such. It's I like to take the image and reinvent it through a type of uncertain painterly journey, where I will move the stuff around, often for a very long time, until I reach a result that I find curious, or that interests me, or that I think is a success for some reason.
And I've read that you like to be surprised.
Very much. I think the surprise element to me is the success. Some would call it the aha moment. But yeah, that moment for me is often it, and it's not always the end, and often I completely screw it up and try and do something and then start over. I'd probably cry if you showed me images of these works that I've worked through. There'd be hundreds of them where I've been like, why didn't I just stop there?
Yeah.
That said, the where to stop is very important for me, and you can sort of, I think if you see one in person, that's fairly obvious because the marks are spontaneous and gestural and random, and they're often piled on top of one another. Like the mark you see there may have been, I don't know, 40 marks underneath it. Similar but different.
Amazing. And it is representing obviously the person that you're thinking about or that you have the photograph of, but it comes from a sort of abstraction form.
Yes.
So how do you get the feeling that you have captured something and that you're ready to stop?
Oh, that's the hardest part. And the danger for me sometimes is where I feel it's gotten too obvious. I'll often say to my wife, is this too obvious? Text her, can you come down to the studio please? And is this too obvious? And usually I'm told I'm being silly, but which usually I am probably, but...
What do you mean too obvious?
It starts to look too much as though I was trying to paint a face, if that makes sense. Or paint, whatever.
Do you feel like you want the viewer not to think that you are painting a face?
No, not as such. I don't mind either way, really. But some of the best works I've made have been quite ambiguous, quite abstract, and the surprise has been that moment where it's more like a thing than a face. It's just this thing that you can't really... And it's still a face. You can still see that element of the portrait there or whatever, a suggestion of a head and shoulders or a hand somewhere, but a hand by a face. But it comes back to that surprise thing, that often the surprise is in these most abstract, unplanned moments. And I like the unplanned. I like that. I mean, the paint is the I'm sure many artists have said this before, the paint is the miraculous stuff, not the artist.
Well, I'm not sure about that. Probably a bit of both. But it's such an interesting idea, how you make and what you end up coming up with. I mean, for you, do you want to see something of the character that you're responding to?
I think so. Yeah.
So you do need that.
I do need that, but it doesn't necessarily need to be like, as in a realistic portrait, like, oh, you really captured that likeness well. It's more like an energy, which I guess is why, if I'm painting musicians, which so often I end up working from an image of a musician that I'm really into at the time, if you're into their music enough or obsessed with the music even for a period, I'm sure you start to get to know something of them, especially if you feel as the artist, the mad creative, that you relate to them. And then there's this sort of exchange there in the making where hopefully you are capturing something of a personality or what you would perceive it to be. But how much do you ever really know about that?
Do you like to do research on that person?
Yeah, more often than not. You get interested and you want to know a bit more about the people.
And do you know what kind of work you might end up making, or do you have sort of ideas as in colours and that sort of thing before you start, or how can you talk us through your process?
Well, for example, if I have an idea of a show, I might decide, like for example, I'm working towards something in the Melbourne Art Fair, and I'm interested in this idea of the alter ego, which I won't explain at this point, it's not necessary, but so there's a few mostly singer, songwriter / musician / rock stars that I kind of want to make these paintings sort of based on. And the idea with a lot of them is that they have an alter ego or something like that, another name they call themselves, as have I as an artist. And so, I might start with a brainstorm, then I'll maybe write a list. It's like you're going to involve these characters, and then I'll find images I want to use. And if you see my studio, it's scattered with these tiny little printouts of sort of printed out photographs of things either images I had lying around or mostly stuff you find on the internet. And I work from those little images. Not solely, not only from the images, as we've discussed, often towards the end the painting is just sort of making itself, but I start with that image, and usually I'll kind of project the image onto my canvas, like just a sketch. But there's negotiation going forward for that part to be removed a bit. I was just thinking yesterday maybe, but anyway, that's what I tend to do. But it often bears, well, almost certainly always bears very little on the end result. Because once that happens, that's a starting point, and then I want to surprise myself, as we said before, or surprise the viewer too. Equally importantly.
And how do you go about applying the paint? Do you start with some underpainting or a background at the beginning, or how does that work?
Some, not a lot. It tends, most of it, the way I've worked, especially since I started those doctoral studies, was that the main part happens in this kind of big effort at once. But that's not a rule, it's not rigid, it's just the way it tends to come together. Usually there'll be a bit of underpainting, like maybe a wash of some thin paint in the background, and maybe just a bit of playing around with some thin paint or whatever. But usually it's quite performative, my work. It's physical. I get quite exhausted sometimes, I put my whole body into it, and so there's this performative thing that usually the main result comes out of, which usually will happen in a kind of a concentrated effort, a kind of an all at once thing, wet on wet. It's usually working back into paint that hasn't dried, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Amazing. And it is, you can see the movement, obviously, as you look at the paintings. I mean, it is very gestural, but it also feels like powerful movement. There's something powerful about it.
Yeah, I'd say they're quite, hopefully I'd want them to be pack a punch.
Yeah. And it's not like the marks are just small sort of gestural marks. Everything is very big and sort of pronounced.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's room for small marks, and there should be on any work, but I sometimes wonder if I'm incapable of gentle painting. I don't want to rule it out, and there's areas in any painting that can be calmer, and like I say never, but...
It's a fascinating process. So you're working with the wet paint and applying, adding on, taking off, using rags. And then do you ever actually kind of get to the point where you think, okay, I'm happy with this, how it's feeling or how it's looking, and then now I just want to add some other parts, add some little bits? Or is it more just sort of one long constant process?
Well, it's a process, but it can't all be appallingly difficult, There has to be some joy in it. And I'm not saying that the powerful parts or those physical parts are never enjoyable. but they can be quite laborious and frustrating, or incredibly so at times. But there has to be times where you've actually relaxed into the thing, and you're just kind of going along at a less frantic pace. I try to make that happen, and I think I have to try and incorporate those calmer painting moments in more, because I in all fairness, it's probably bad for my health sometimes.
It's exhausting, I imagine.
I do exhaust myself sometimes. Often it's about being in the right headspace where you're not, you're working hard and you're working ferociously, but you're not swearing and forgetting to breathe, and because that does happen.
Yeah, I can imagine. Do you keep working and keep working and keep working until you have that moment of surprise, or you have that moment of sort of resolution in some ways?
That tends to be the way. But similar to what we were saying before, there has been a problem which occurred at some point during the extended studies we talked about, where it felt like I was making everything too hard on myself. So sometimes these days I have to accept the way I work, a work could happen in 15 minutes or it could take a month. So, for example, during that first lockdown years back, I had a studio at Unitech, I had a fellowship there, and we were given that warning, you've got this much time to get your stuff and leave. So I grabbed a few of my tools and paints and took them down to my garage beneath my house, which is now my studio, which I've never used. And then about a month later, after that lockdown began, I wandered down there, and I remember I made a cracker of a work in about 15 minutes. And it was one of those moments where it was just right. And especially after a month of not painting, that was really surprising, because normally after a month I'm pulling my hair out like I don't even know what to do. It's temporarily vanished. But yeah, in that instance, I was like, well, you can actually remember this, because it's one of a handful I remember. You can afford to, not everything has to take it out of you. Sometimes it will just happen without the work, but it depends on the mood you're in, it depends on the challenge, it depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And did you find lockdown was a productive time?
It's a blurry time in retrospect. Not altogether fun. But I remember there was a point there during that first one or two, I've lost track of what they did with that, but where I was just going down and finding the making pretty fulfilling and fairly easy, as in I wasn't going crazy. And that was good, because making should be like that. Not always easy, but just to be down there making and not feel like it's all too difficult. And I think I was on a bit of a roll there. I remember being very productive for a while.
That's good. It seems to be that artists go either way with that sort of lockdown time. Some really weren't productive, and others.
I think I did nothing.
Were.
Like I said, nothing for a month except, I don't know,
eat.
Yeah. Drink too much. But then I think I spent a large period of that year just making a lot of work, and a lot of it I look back and I'm thinking that was really good. So yeah, I think for me maybe it was good in the sense that, well, they said we couldn't do anything, didn't they? So I didn't really have distractions. Like I didn't have this friend saying come hang out, or I didn't feel like going off to this favourite place, or I didn't opt to go running for an hour rather than stick it out in the studio. Well, you could go running back then, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
There were a lot less options, so I haven't even thought about it till we've talked about it just now, but I think in that way that probably was quite helpful, that lack of
distractions.
Yeah.
How do you approach colour? I mean, it does feel like you have a certain sort of Toby Raine colour palette.
Right.
How would you say you approach colour?
Well, I think I do have my own colours. I've been told I do. I think for some reason I'm not that comfortable using colours straight from the tube. I don't know why, if it's just my tendency to be too hard on myself, or maybe it's subconscious, like you're going for a certain thing. Maybe it's just years of this way I've worked, where the movement and the painting on wet, sort of these are my own somewhat unique things perhaps started to take shape in terms of colour and amongst other things.
Yeah. Well, how would you describe your palette?
Fleshy. My paintings have skins, and I think maybe sometimes they can be confrontational, sometimes pretty, but sometimes unpretty. They're random. I don't have this palette set up with a bunch of colours on them. I'll mix up a few to start with, and then in a way it might be quite limited, the Toby Raine colour palette. It's hard for me to describe it. It's intuitive.
Yeah. And how do you actually manage your palette if you're mixing colours and using a lot of paint? How do you manage that?
I had a bunch of custom palettes made up out of Perspex. So they're square, and they've got a hole for my thumb in the traditional way, and they're quite large. I think there's enough to put a lot of paint on there, so often there'll be handfuls worth of oil paint on there, and I'll sort of mix it up. The flesh one, if I'm doing one of my heads, or the figure-y, portrait-y, whatever you want to call it, thing that I do, there'll be a flesh thing, and there'll be a lot of white paint and some medium that I'll add to it, and then there'll be other colours that I mix in around the edges. But I got a ton of these palettes made up, so most of them are sitting there unused still from the recent batch, and I've just got 4 or 5 at the time, which hopefully I'll scrape the excess paint off when I'm done if I'm not too exhausted, or I'll use a paint scraper to get it off when it's a bit dry, and I'll reuse those. And sometimes also, if I want runny paint, I've got a bunch of old buckets that, like numerous things, either they're household, they have food stuff in them, or they're from art supplies that have gesso in them, or paint or something. So I've got a ton of tins and palettes and so forth.
And you've got an amazing looking studio. I think we've got a photo of that. Thank you in your studio.
Thank you.
It looks like a real artist studio. It's pretty full on.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a messy place. And if you look at my paintings, I think the studio is reflective of that. But in a way, it's all that grimy stuff that isn't the hopeful success of the final painting. It's the stuff I tread into the floor, or that drips, or the paint that runs off the canvas or slides off the canvas and ends up on the carpet there. And there's a very big workbench, and there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of brushes, there's a lot of knives. But it took years to become like that, and that was part of I'm pleased about that, because it's not a pedantic, tidy space. It couldn't be if it would be any good. I remember that was one of the things, even in second year, like the tutors would come in second year undergrad and they'd say, geez, you make a mess, don't you? Because there'd already be, drop cloths down and paint running down the walls, and there'd be tins and pallets, and there'd be canvases everywhere. I remember, as I said early on, I decided I wanted to take painting seriously, so early on I started being like, well, you're going to have to spend this many $100s on some more brushes, and you're going to have to buy 10 tubes of paint this week, and you're going to have to treat that studio like an actual studio rather than like you're the student sitting at that little desk still trying to get right into it. So I think the studio now, I hope, was reflective of getting used to treating a studio like a real workspace very early on.
Yeah. Do you think your work reflects your personality?
It would certainly reflect part of it. Maybe not the part everyone sees. But yeah, it's a bit chaotic, and so am I. The studio, definitely. I mean, the thing is, my house, I'm a bit of a tidy freak. Like, I like everything in its right place, whereas my studio is chaotic. Even when it's tidy, it still has a chaos to it. So that's interesting.
It is. Representing different parts of your personality.
Yeah, well, I think for me, probably that performative or gestural or physical part of my work is indicative of some sort of probably an inner struggle that I work out in the studio. So probably if that's reflected in that kind of grunginess in my studio and the chaos, the way the works turn out, that would make sense.
You've been represented by Gao Langsford Gallery and were part of their art fair alongside works from people like Colin McCann and Max Gimblett. Amazing.
Yeah.
And then Scott Laurie Gallery, you were represented by Scott and had solo show there. And then also connected with Scott for quite a while with the Vivian Gallery.
Yeah. I think I showed work at the Vivian with Scott even before Gal Langsford and I started working together. So
which is amazing. And we were just talking about how much we love Scott Laurie.
Yes.
And miss him.
Yeah, love and miss Scott a lot, and can't wait to see him again one of these days, and be it art related or not. And so him and I were sort of buddies who worked together before he even had his lovely space, which we're all sorry is now closed up.
Yeah. How did you make those connections with, galleries, such reputable galleries?
Well, I remember Gary Langsford. Gary came along to a show I did in the first year of my doctorate as part of the study. It was a show that's sort of reflective of the fact that you're making work and you're studying in it. So you'd have people early on who clearly had their eyes out, but I didn't get together with them until years after that. But I think there were people who are paying attention to those who are working hard and making work that's interesting. And then, of course, there was the serendipity of Paige Blackie Gallery with James Blackie there, and him and I still have a real good working relationship. And they took me to, I think the next connection with that happened when they took me to the Sydney Art Fair. James Macon, who's my Melbourne dealer, who's a terrific guy, he wandered up when I wasn't there at the Sydney Art Fair, and he said, "Oh, I like this, who's this?" And he got my details from my gallerists there, the Wellington gallerists, and he got in touch with me after I got back from Sydney. So that's how that happened. He took me on immediately. That was great, and I did a show with him. It was 2018, I think I did my first show with him in Melbourne, first solo, which was either the same year as that art fair or the year after, I can't quite remember. Yeah, I think I've done 3 solos with James Macon now.
And that first show was a sellout show, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, I had a few of those. Not to brag, but it did happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, that's a nice feeling. It's nice when that happens. Yeah.
So good.
It helps.
And that's quite an interesting thing, I think, for people listening to hear about is making that connection with a gallery that's not in your country of New Zealand, connecting with the Australian art market. How do you find that? Do you find that's a nice kind of addition to what you're doing here in New Zealand?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's other connections that get made as well. James Macon's taken on 1 or 2 other New Zealand artists recently, and he got to know Scott Lowry. They'd meet up, and so it's good for my connections, but it's also good for other people's connections. As I say, I'll be working with James Macon in Melbourne next February, making work for that now. And that's an art fair, so that's the Melbourne Art Fair, so that's a lot of good exposure. Art fairs are, I think, like I say, that's how I met James Macon. And I think I've been to a few of them now, but I think the Gal Langsford connection, though they were kind of more aware of me anyway, may have happened through some work at an art fair also. Great exposure.
Yeah, and building your community.
Certainly.
Is so good. And you seem really good at that. You've entered a lot of art awards over the years.
Not recently, but I used to do it heaps, and I should start doing it again. Yeah, and I think I was finalist in quite a few back in a few years back.
And what would you say is the benefit of entering art awards, apart from obviously exposure and making connections?
You know, I mean, being a finalist in itself is always good on the CV. You got certain people who say once you're represented by so-and-so galleries, you shouldn't enter art awards anymore. Now, that's something a lot of people don't agree with. I don't agree with it, because even since I got with galleries, got represented by them, they'd often say, here's some awards you could consider entering. You know, they'll make their artists aware of opportunities, residencies and that. So, you know, just having been a finalist is great for your CV. It gets you on the map more. Often your work will end up getting bought, which all artists need. You know, we all need a buck to survive. And attention from collectors, gallerists, all the good stuff. Often, you know, sometimes you might be asked to give a talk at an award if you're a finalist or you win or something. This is all good.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah, it's really good. And you do seem comfortable talking about your practice. Have you had a lot of experience with that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've given plenty of talks. I've had to talk. Obviously, I had to talk a lot during the postgraduate studies. You'd have to give presentations. Also, with the lecturing work at Elam and at other places, you know, you're having to get up and talk about your work and about painting or art in general a lot. And some people aren't comfortable with that. I've never minded. My mum got me into public speaking when I was little with her love of the English language. So I guess that was 'cause she was an English teacher. So I guess, yeah, comfortable talking.
Yeah,
yeah,
which is great if you have that.
It helps.
Yeah, it helps.
Fortunate, I guess.
And have you done many residencies?
No, but since you mention it, I am interested. I mean, even in terms of, I don't know, logistics and making things possible. Like my freight to Melbourne for my solo with James Macon last October was horrendous. And I got to thinking, it would be really great to have residencies now and then that meant you could make work where you were presenting it.
Yes.
Because the bill for that freight was phenomenal, and I think everything's gone up.
Do you have to pay, does the artist have to pay for that?
I think there may not be set rules, but the way I tend to have done it with dealers is you get the work to them and they get it anywhere else that it needs to go. Right. Whether it's back to you or to a collector, or I think that's the sort of the guideline or whatever.
Are you thinking that you would like to extend your international connections and have a gallery in another country?
Would love to, yeah. Certainly broader horizons if they should present themselves. I was just walking through this beautiful monastery, converted, but very old one in France, which they'd restored, and there was this great art show there. And I sort of thought it'd be nice to show it somewhere in Europe, just looking at the show that was on, even do a show in a space like that. But it'll be definitely on the cards to get representation further out. Other places, definitely open to that.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. And just going back to your actual paintings and their titles, things like Meatloaf Witnessing the Gates of Heaven, R.I.P., which you painted in 2022, and Baron Yeti Lives, Virgin Mary, Mother of Christ, the Annunciation Among Flowers.
Yeah.
So Are you trying to help us to understand something more with your titles, or are you trying to tell a story, or what's behind how you decide how you title?
I think the titles are part of the story. They're also maybe a background. They usually come from what the image came from, not always. I think the titles became as they are during the doctorate that we keep coming back to, that I spent too long doing. I think what people responded to most in them, not only was there information, there seemed to be this type of humour. And maybe that's the point. The works are, they can be quite, I guess, described to me as powerful or whatever, but that there's also, and there's a darkness in a lot of them, I think there's a darkness in some of them, but there's a light side to it. And that maybe has to do with what I referred to earlier about the contemporary painter having to embrace the hopelessly romantic nature of what they are doing. And maybe that's evident in this kind of straightforward yet light-hearted title that goes with a very physical sort of work.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know.
Do you like for people to know who the person is?
I think it's made sense to me to provide some of that information in the title. Another thing dealers have said to me, not that it's all about what dealers say to you, but they say, collectors really like to know about it. They like to talk about the work to their friends or whatever. So that's interesting. It's not why I titled them the way I did, but that's an interesting point.
Yeah, that is interesting. What do you think collectors are loving about your work?
Perhaps it's that sense of something that's fairly unique. It's very much its own thing. I don't know, I have had people say to me before that they found them relatable. There's something in it that they can relate to, whatever that may be.
Yeah, I agree. They're very emotive.
Yeah, I couldn't disagree with that.
Yeah. Okay, question time, Toby. What would you say to your younger artistic self?
Well, I was thinking about that. Assuming my younger artistic self would listen, which he wouldn't, I'd struggle to pay attention now, although I'm trying to pay more attention to advice. But I don't know, I guess it would be very patient, keep working hard, but also be guarded, because if you do eventually find success, it's not going to solve all of your problems. And also, not everyone's going to like you. If you find some success and you've established yourself and you have a handful of fans, say if you have 100 fans, you're going to have some enemies too. When I started at art school, I was too worried, which is the part where I say patience, and I would add to that, don't stress it. Don't worry so much about finishing the degree, you'll get there, and just work hard. But also, you're a lot more idealistic at 22 than, I am now, best part of 20 years later.
Which artist do you think has inspired you or influenced you?
Well, I suppose there's New Zealand, and then there's outside of, isn't there? I guess my influence is sort of on a broader scale. I mean, there's hundreds, but mainly on the list there was that Francis Bacon. He was huge to me, as he would any person sort of who likes to paint the way sort of gesture and the rest of it. Bacon, Frank Auerbach, Willem de Kooning, Philip Guston, who's a big hero to just about any figurative painter these days, Guston. Basquiat, Jean-Michel Basquiat, that is the New York painter from the 80s. So, Marlene Dumas, Peter Doig and Daniel Richter were big to me when I was at art school. I'm not sure the influence of them is so obvious now. I mean, that would be a very brief list of sort of artists from the last 100 years or current ones. Very brief list. Outside of New Zealand, favourites in NZ. And, apologies, I will miss people here, to anyone who has it. But, Billy McQueen, Jamie Chapman, Marcus Hipper, some of these people are friends of mine. Peter Madden, the collage artist. Judy Miller, who was a teacher of mine in third year, great painter. Who else? Historically, Tony Fornerson, big fan of his work. Obviously, I'm missing some here, but I won't remember till this is done.
Yeah.
Apologies to whoever it is. Yeah.
Well, that's a good list.
Mm.
And as an artist, what would you say is your biggest challenge?
See, yeah, I thought this might be a question you'd ask, and initially I thought, well, it's the biggest challenge is getting motivated to be in the studio and get down there and keep making work and the ups and downs of creativity. But then I actually realized there was a much more specific answer to that, and it was a much more obvious one. My biggest challenge has been other people's perception, other people's perceptions of you, of me specifically, and how people, I think particularly in the times we're living in, people allow their perceptions of who you are, of who they think you are as a person, to colour their perceptions of who you are as a creative and, I don't know, morally or whatever, and of your art, therefore. And that's something I've had a few issues with. So yeah, that certainly has been easily my biggest challenge. And like I say, I was going to say something fluffy about the struggles of creativity, and then I thought, well, actually that's something that's been pretty real for me. Because I think we are living in quite polarised times, and it's a small pond in New Zealand, and there can be fickle and unpleasant behaviour, and my challenge has been like, wow, there's some people out there who are saying some unpleasant things.
That's a shame.
To the point where it's actually, reached the point of defamation, and that is quite challenging when you realise people are prepared to behave that nasty in such an unpleasant way, whether it's due to jealousy or whatever.
Well, that sounds horrible.
It's not fun.
No.
Yeah, it's certainly a challenge.
That's not okay.
No.
You have to work out how you manage that.
Yeah, develop a tough skin. I mean...
It's a shame that it has to happen, though.
It shouldn't happen, and that would be something I would, hope people could learn, especially if people address it like I'm saying now, that it's art should be about art, and if you have perceptions about someone, particularly someone you don't really know at all, it's dangerous on a lot of levels to bring those perceptions, be it sort of behind a keyboard on social media or blatantly kind of bad-mouthing them in public, bringing that to their work and assuming it's your perception of them should taint them as an artist or their art, or to sort of politicize them as an artist or their art through your own assumptions about them, when in fact you're not aware. And even if you did know them, it wouldn't. Art should stand on its own. It should be free from persecution.
Yeah,
and
the judgment.
And the artist up to a point should be as well. So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, I'm sorry you've endured that. And what drives you to make this sort of work that you're making?
I think for me it's the challenge of wanting to keep surprising myself the way we discuss the surprise part. Wanting to push that further. wanting to, and you may have a moment, or I may, an artist may, a couple of times a year, if lucky, where you have that moment where you're like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. That for me is it. It's that work is a cracker. Whatever it is I'm doing, I've just done a little something there that pushed it that much further. That for me is the fodder for creativity. It's the motivation to keep making work. Just surprise and push oneself, and hopefully make much of a challenge as this is, make your best work yet, if you can.
Yeah. You have been described as a leading figure in the contemporary New Zealand artscape.
It's generous.
And, you seem to have the kind of practice that is just going to be massive for a long time. I feel like, probably when you're dead, you'll be like super, super famous.
Oh, thank you, Mandy. That's certainly, one would hope to be remembered. That's, I think part of painting is, Francis Bacon always referred to it as we're trying to defeat death.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of that in there. Yeah.
But it's been such a pleasure meeting you, Toby. Thank you very, very much for coming out to Muriwai and seeing the connection with Colin McCann's paintings as you came out here.
Yeah, I'm so taken by the beach there, and how much it always have been, how much it just reminds you of those brooding paintings of his. And thank you, Mandy, for having me. This has been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking. It's been a very interesting discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.